Remember your local chippy, the smell of hot oil drifting down the street, the steamed-up windows on a Friday night, fish wrapped in paper, chips spilling out, vinegar soaking through until your fingers smelled of it for hours. You'd queue after school, after work, after the pub. Everyone did. It didn't matter where you were in Britain. Every town had one, and you knew exactly which one was yours. Fish and chips wasn't just food. It was comfort, routine, something shared. It felt permanent, like it had always been there and always would be. But here's the truth nobody really likes admitting. Fish and chips is not ancient. It is not medieval. It is not some timeless tradition passed down unchanged through centuries of British life. It's far younger than we pretend, and its origins are far stranger, far messier, and far more global than the story we tell ourselves. This national symbol wasn't born out of rural England or old British kitchens. It was shaped by cities, outsiders, and necessity. And once you understand where fish and chips really came from, it becomes impossible to look at it the same way again. Most people assume fish and chips is rural, ancient, and purely English. I'll explain why that belief exists and why it is wrong. This story doesn't begin in a fishing village. It begins with immigration, poverty, and industrial cities. To understand fish and chips, you have to understand who Britain didn't want to talk about. By the early 20th century, fish and chips had stopped being just a meal. It had become a symbol. During wartime, it was framed as proof of British resilience. While bombs fell and cities burned, the chippy stayed open. Fish and chips were never rationed during the Second World War. They were protected by the government because they were seen as essential to morale, a hot meal that reminded people life was still normal. At its peak, Britain had tens of thousands of fish and chip shops. Every high street, every seaside town, every working-class neighborhood depended on them. Fish and chips fed factory workers, dockers, miners, and families who needed filling food at a price they could afford. It became the taste of endurance. Politicians leaned into this image. Newspapers repeated it. Fish and chippies were no longer just something people ate. They were what Britain was, a shorthand for fairness, simplicity, and national character. Here is what rarely gets said. Britain did not simply inherit fish and chips as a tradition. It carefully shaped it, promoted it, and turned it into a symbol on purpose. And that raises an uncomfortable question about who gets to decide what British really means. The story of fish and chips does not begin in quiet coastal villages or old English kitchens. It begins in the smoke and noise of 19th century industrial Britain. As factories multiplied and cities exploded in size, millions of people were pulled off the land and packed into overcrowded urban streets. They worked long hours, earned little, and needed food that was fast, filling, and cheap. Fish and chips solved that problem perfectly. It provided dense calories for exhausted factory workers who had neither time nor money for home cooking. You could eat it standing in the street. You did not need cutlery. It was hot, heavy, and satisfying. This was not about tradition or taste. It was about survival. Behind that simplicity sat powerful systems. Expanding trade routes brought cheap fish inland by rail. New fishing technologies increased supply. Industrial frying fats replaced expensive oils, making deep frying viable at scale. Everything about fish and chips was shaped by efficiency. That is the part the nostalgic story leaves out. Fish and chips did not emerge from cultural pride or ancient custom. It emerged because industrial Britain needed to feed its workers quickly and cheaply. It was not heritage. It was economics, later disguised as tradition. Here is the part of the story that often gets quietly ignored. Fried fish and fried potatoes did not come from old English family kitchens. They arrived through immigrant communities, bringing food traditions Britain did not yet have. In the 19th century, Jewish immigrants from Europe settled in Britain's growing industrial cities. They brought with them a tradition of frying fish in oil, a practical way to preserve and prepare food that fit urban life. Fried fish was sold on the streets long before it was seen as British. Potatoes, already common, followed the same path. They were cheap, filling, and easy to cook in bulk. These foods thrived in working-class neighborhoods because they solved real problems. Outsiders fed people others had ignored. Street food culture filled the gaps left by poverty and overcrowding, offering hot meals to those with little time or money. And then something familiar happened. The food was adopted. It spread. It became popular. And eventually, the nation claimed it as its own. This pattern repeats throughout history. Immigrants adapt. Locals adopt. The origin fades. Fish and chips is not a story of isolation or purity. It is a story of integration, of Britain becoming itself by absorbing what it once saw as foreign. Fish and chips feels timeless, but much of what we think of as authentic was deliberately designed. Portions, batter, sides, even the layout of the shop were not inherited from the past. They were standardized to make the business work. Large portions kept customers full and loyal. Thick batter protected the fish and made cheaper cuts viable. Chips were cut wide because they fried faster and stayed hot longer. Mushy peas, scraps, and pickled sides were not cultural rituals. They were low-cost add-ons that increased profit. Even the classic chippy layout, with its counter, fryers, and quick turnaround, was built for speed and volume. Nothing about this evolved slowly through generations of family tradition. It was refined through trial and error, shaped by margins, cues, and customer expectation. That's the uncomfortable reality. Fish and chips wasn't preserved because it was sacred. It was adjusted because it was practical. It wasn't done because it was traditional. It was done because it worked. For generations, fish and chips became a ritual. Friday nights meant the chippy. Seaside trips weren't complete without gulls circling and paper-wrapped parcels eaten on a bench. Families shared meals straight from the paper, steam rising, fingers greasy, conversations unplanned. It was informal, communal, and reliable. You didn't book, you didn't dress up, you just went. And then quietly, it began to fade. Across Britain, fish and chip shops have been closing at a steady pace. Rising rents, higher energy costs, and expensive ingredients have squeezed margins that were already thin. Supermarkets now sell cheaper, faster alternatives. Chains offer convenience and branding. Tastes have shifted toward variety, delivery apps, and food designed to travel, not to be eaten immediately on the street. Behind every closure is a human cost. Family-run shops built on long hours and personal sacrifice are disappearing. Owners who worked 6 or 7 days a week for decades are locking up for the last time. Skills learned on the job vanish with them. What is being lost is not just a meal. It is a way of life that once quietly held communities together. Fish and chips is not fake. But it is not what we like to pretend it is either. It is not ancient, pure, or untouched by the outside world. It is something far more revealing. It is the result of change. The uncomfortable truth is that Britain loves traditions created by immigrants, but often struggles to acknowledge the people who made them possible. We celebrate the food. We forget the hands that cooked it. Fish and chips reflects class, empire, migration, and adaptation all at once. It exists because people moved, because cities grew, because workers needed to eat, and because outsiders filled the gaps others ignored. That does not make it less British. It makes it more honest. So the next time you eat fish and chips, understand what you are really tasting. You are not eating the past, frozen in time. You are eating history, shaped by necessity, shaped by migration, shaped by change. Recognizing that does not take anything away. It gives the dish the respect it actually deserves.